Hello. Our story begins with lots of exposition, so that this story makes any sense at all. Anakin Skywalker was born on the mid-rim planet of Quen, which sat on the coreward edge of Hutt space. It was as close as you could get towards being in Hutt territory without actually being in it. Anakin was still a product of the Force. Plagueis and his new student Palpatine happened to start trying to do ritualistic workings earlier, making Anakin's birth year 65 BBY. Due to being born around a Jedi outpost in the Gem Cities, he was found very early into his infancy. The woman who gave birth to Anakin was a Skywalker by name as well, distant cousin to Shmi Skywalker, who was born parsecs away. Young Anakin would be brought to the temple at Coruscant, where he would receive a relatively pampered lifestyle. The eyes of the council would be on him at all times, and even one of their members, Palpatine, would be the one that would oversee his training. Young Skywalker's advancement was accelerated due to him being a Jedi raised from inside the temple. However, this difference of surrounding didn't change his interests. Some of them just took a little bit more time to find. Being a good person was innate to him, but finding the interest in mechanical work took most of his adolescence to find. As a Padawan learner, under a counselor, Anakin learned a lot about the responsibility that came with the weight of the seat on the High Council. His master was one of the most renowned members of the Order and greatly respected. Such esteem was naturally passed down to him due to being selected by the widely adored Jedi Master. Pali and Anakin worked together for several years. Despite Anakin being a Jedi prodigy and considered the chosen one, Pali didn't recommend Anakin for his trials until he fully believed that Anakin was a capable Jedi. This wasn't holding Anakin back, because Pali, especially as a counselor, understood some of the more subtle details that were required of a Jedi. Anakin did become irritable with this, but it never created a disturbance in their bond as master and apprentice. There was tension, but it never bubbled into anything more. Pali knew his student, and by creating the sense of tension, he was able to remove the illusion of greatness, so that his student could be humble but also stoic. The combination of Anakin and Pali as master and apprentice really jump-started Anakin's life as a Jedi Knight. He would, at the age of 24, train a student of his own, one who would complete their training by the time Anakin was 33. At the age of 25, he would be separated from his student for a solo undercover mission requested by the Council. Due to their extensive trust in him, they wanted him to do the mission. Part of this rationale was because they wanted to see if he would complete mandates requested by the Council. It was on this mission where he would find and fall in love with a woman named Karashari. Aside from being a Jedi, he was very emotionally attached. It was of concern to Master Depation, and they did work to resolve it, but it never really did work. It was through this that Anakin was able to accidentally, albeit, procreate what would be twins. When he was 26, in the year 40 BBY, Karashari would die to birth-related complications, and he'd be left with twins. In an effort to frame things in a manner of which that would seem in a positive light, he would inform the Council that during his mission he had saved a woman. That same woman contacted him shortly before her passing, telling him that she was on the verge of death, and so he went back out to her. When he got there, she had passed. Therefore, he was bringing two children back to the temple, Luke and Leia. They didn't have a last name, as the woman herself never carried a maiden name. So the Council elected to call them Skywalker, because that's what they typically did in these type of scenarios, which is something Anakin was aware of. The way everything transpired was like this. He went out on the mission. It was a 2-month mission where Master Depation watched over Anakin's student. Depation was stepping down from the Council as it was, so everything worked out in their favor. Anakin, over the course of the next year, would maintain his connection to Karashari, but this life was very challenging. They saw each other only twice after their first meeting, and the second time was the day she died, when he saw her dead. Of course, Anakin, despite his lifelong Jedi training, wanted to save her, but it just wasn't possible. Everything happened so quickly that it was impossible for Anakin to find peace in the situation. The only thing he was able to truly do was fabricate his lie to the Council. Following Karashari's death, Luke and Leia would be raised within the temple, and just like their father, they would receive tight oversight from the Council. The Council was obviously surprised that the twins were so high in concentration of midichlorians, and they almost elected to do a blood test to see if they were, Anakins. But they decided to turn a blind eye. The midichlorian test also did give parental results, but typically they were ignored because parents weren't going to be brought into the order, and the father of Luke and Leia, had seemingly walked out, so the only thing they really could focus on was the mother who had passed. In other words, those who actually took the test from the twins didn't have a reason to look back on the parents because the only quote-unquote parent had died. Anakin would return to training his own student for the next 8 years. Similar in fashion to how Pali was with him, he was with his own student. They were ready to become a knight earlier than most, but those same subtleties that Anakin complained about were the same ones he focused on as an instructor. In 32 BBY, his student would pass his trials and become a knight. It would also be the same year as a terrible blockade over Naboo. Instead of relying on slave boys to help Qui-Gon and Padme get off Tatooine, it was Quinlan Vos. Master Jin would still die at the hands of Maul and Naboo. Obi-Wan would be made a knight, and he would have no student to train. On the other side of things, Master Yaddle would step down from the High Council and go missing. Her seat eventually would be given to the 33-year-old Chosen One. The training of Luke and Leia went very similarly to that of Anakin's. However, the twins were under the impression that they were the children of Anakin. There was a reason for this: their names. Because they were called Skywalkers, they believed that they were. This was actually very common in these cases. Obviously, when they were brought to the temple, Anakin wasn't a member of the council, but the point still stood. Children without last names, that were given last names of Jedi who found them, typically believed they were related, even if they were different species. The Jedi simply encouraged that this line of thought deteriorated as they grew up. This same method was applied here. The only difference is, as a counselor and master, Anakin elected to spend a lot of time in the youngling halls, training classes of students. These classes, of course, included those that his children presided in. Anakin loved his twins with all of his heart, and perhaps it was the love of them that kept him so grounded. He knew he didn't falter into darkness because of Master Depation, but he also still felt pain from the loss of Kashari. However, as a master on the council, he continued to maintain his emotions in a tight and strong connection to the Force and to the Code. Luke and Leia would be trained by different masters, both of which being counselors. This surprisingly was Anakin's decision. He suggested to the council that they have one of their members train each of the children, and they agreed. If Luke and Leia were anything like Master Skywalker with raw potential, then the twins should be trained by fully capable masters. The instructors would be Shakti for the boy and Plo Koon for the girl. This gave Luke and Leia respective masters that, like Depation, understood how to balance the life of the council and the importance of instructing. These two teachers were the perfect picks, and they chose to train these students respectively at the same time. So Luke and Leia would start their Padawan training around the same time as Anakin did, when they were both 10 years old. This brought them all the way to the rank of knight when they were 19 years old, which came at the worst time. Luke and Leia as knights at the beginning of the Clone Wars. While much of the galactic and political turmoil had continued to play out the same, there was only one key difference. Palpatine wasn't grooming children. Anakin didn't let any old nasty politician near his own children as it was, not like Plo or Shakti would have anyways. Palpatine truthfully was unaware of the raw power between the two students and their father. He knew of Anakin because he was on the council, but he was simply another complacent Jedi Master in his own eyes. There was no concept of the Chosen One for him, because even though the council believed Anakin to be the one that would bring balance to the Force, they didn't iterate such feelings to anyone else, especially not senators from Naboo, who became the Chancellor. Palpatine had no interest in a Jedi student, because none, in his eyes, could compare to Maul. Truthfully, he believed that Maul had survived Naboo, and he had been searching for him the entire time. In secrecy, he also stole Savage Opress from the Night Brother camp and was training him on Moraband, with the assistance of Dooku. The entire Sith movement was very similar. The only difference was Savage's placement in their ranks. Luke and Leia themselves were ready to face the war head-on. Master Skywalker on the High Council was given a chance to lead one of the larger forces in the Republic. This was because he was a highly accomplished weapons master. Pali was experienced with the saber, but Anakin's own focus on the blade gave him the chance to expand upon his skills exponentially as a counselor, mastering 6 of the forms by the time the war started. A war of which he was currently 43 years old for. Anakin's real struggle was Form 7, because his upbringing didn't channel him to harness the darkness much. Mace and he worked on it a lot, but it just didn't compute for Anakin, which was okay. Many Jedi couldn't use Form 7 to the proficiency of Master Windu. Anakin, due to the sheer size of his company, was permitted to assign Jedi to his ranks, which surprisingly a lot of Jedi didn't do at the beginning of the war. Into his ranks he brought 2 Padawans and 2 Knights. About a week before the war started, Luke and Leia became Knights, and because the twins were so competitive with each other, they wanted to become Masters. They were modest and humble to their approach to the Jedi Code and way, but it didn't mean that they didn't have competition with each other. This was actually encouraged by Shaak Ti and Plo Koon, because it wasn't done in a way that would prohibit either Jedi from neglecting the light, and it wasn't done in malice, but in fun. It was through such fun that they achieved such a high status as young Jedi. In their finished training, it would be the 2 18-year-old Jedi Knights who decided that they would take on their own students. Luke would select a young Caleb Dume, whereas Leia would select a young Ahsoka Tano. These matchups would be challenging for each student in their own way, but they had confidence because they were joining a massive division with a counselor. Skywalker by this point had not disclosed the truth to them about who their parents were, and he was unsure if he ever would. The burden of being their father hadn't stifled him in the slightest, but he still wanted to be transparent, feeling that if he wasn't, it would make him a dishonest man and Jedi, even though he basically lied to the Council. The Galactic Marines, with Commander Baccara, had High General Skywalker, Minor Generals Luke and Leia, and Majors Ahsoka and Caleb. It was a stacked division, and the Marines themselves were ready for combat. Anakin liked having a lot of Jedi around. Baccara didn't at first, but it would be through his relationship with Skywalker that such feelings would change as the weeks went by. The Clone Wars rocked off heavily following the initial Separatist strike at Christophsis, as well as many others around the galaxy. Instead of a battle at Geonosis, the Separatists, like the Trade Federation during the Naboo Crisis, had to be the architects of the war effort. Anakin and his Galactic Marines would be sent to Christophsis alone. While Anakin had his friendships, Obi-Wan being one of the many Jedi he would consider allies, he didn't work with any other divisions. The Galactic Marines were tough, and they were designed to face some of the harshest environments the war could give them. At Christophsis, Anakin, Luke, Leia, and their troopers would see the Separatist military for the first time. There would be a lot of growing pains, but the multiple weeks siege and eventual capture of the system assisted everyone with the adjustment into wartime strategy and habits. The best part is, especially for the generals, is that they were all familiar with each other. During their training, Anakin often involved himself in missions with either his son or daughter. The Council never thought much of it, because even before they became Padawans, Anakin went on missions all the time with counselors and masters of Padawans. This ironically was very intentional. Master Skywalker knew the Council might become suspicious of him if he spent a lot of time around the twins in their youngling halls and then insisted on joining them on missions when they had selected their masters. This gave Anakin a chance to get to know each of his children in a neutral environment where he wasn't tasked with taking care of them. Sometimes Anakin even considered himself a bit of a deadbeat dad because of this, but he was able to warp this perspective because he saw it as ensuring both of his children were raised properly without having to pick or choose. The work of a Jedi was challenging. Being a counselor and training 2 children would force one of them to be treated differently, and Anakin was, in the end, right for giving them a chance with 2 remarkable masters instead of just himself. On Christophsis, during the middle of the siege, Anakin prepared a mission to send his 2 children into enemy lines. He would watch after their students during this mission. The only reason he himself wasn't going was because the Separatists were moving at them with a frontal assault at night. Before they left, Leia stopped both her father and brother. The Padawans weren't present for this, and she asked Anakin a question. It caught everyone involved off guard, but she asked Master Skywalker if he was their father. She knew why they carried his last name, but she did want to know, were they related in some way, shape, or form? This was his opportunity to tell them the truth, and so he did, telling them that only they knew, and he wasn't sure of when he wanted to tell them. Leia held a very cool demeanor. In her mind, she had always known. She didn't know why or how, but it was just always present in her mind. Luke, on the other hand, was a little bit more reactionary to it. He wasn't fond of the quote-unquote lying that was needed to make this a secret, but he understood why it was done. For Luke, more so than his sister, it changed everything. The worst part is, Leia did this out of impulse. They were walking out of the door and she decided to flip the question back at Anakin. He explained to the 2 of them that he cared deeply about each of them. The only question they had for him was, what was their mother like? And Anakin smiled with gentleness, telling them that she burned like a star. It was just a shame how short that burst of light lasted. To hear their mother described in such a way brought warmth to them. Obviously, more would need to be discussed, but for right now, it would suffice. On their way to the back of enemy lines, Luke and Leia spoke about this revelation, and why Leia hadn't ever said anything to him about it. The twins, while almost being complete clones of one another, had their own varying personalities. Both were loyal to the Code and the Jedi way, but Luke more so than his sister. Young Luke considered becoming a temple guard, before the thrill of competition with his sister dragged him into a different direction. He was extremely loyal to the Jedi way, and the reason for his emotional neglect of such a reality was because it broke everything he believed about the Jedi. Of course, for him as an individual, it didn't have to change anything, but the reality is, it would. His father and sister were Jedi. In a way, it was almost more of a pull for him to become a temple guard. Leia, on the other hand, simply had confirmed a suspicion. It was because of this initial belief that Leia adopted an interest outside of loyalty to the Jedi Order. Her belief drove her to be more investigative. She loved the thrill of the hunt. It was something she enjoyed doing with Master Plo. Leia found investigation and uncovering mysteries to be her joy in life as a Jedi. In war, there likely weren't many mysteries to reveal, but if there was an opportunity, like the one with her father, she was going to pounce on it. Her reaction more or less to the news was, cool, whatever, not in the who cares, but in the it didn't affect her individually like it did Luke. Despite this, they continued into enemy lines, where they learned more about resources and where they're being pushed into the war zone. The Separatists planned on unloading a full division into their war effort at Christophsis. The plan was to completely eradicate this group of clones and Jedi. Killing the Counselor was a top priority for them, and with the intel secured, including Separatist battle tactics, the twins prepared to leave. They were then stopped by Asajj Ventress, who challenged both Jedi. 4 lightsabers ignited, and the twins darted at the Sith assassin. Across the city, the battle began at night. It was hard to see, but Skywalker led his men to the front lines. Ahsoka and Caleb were shadowing the clone captain of the Legion. Bakra followed his Jedi general into the ramparts that were set up. The clone artillery had to use night vision to make sure they didn't clobber the side of a skyscraper. The Separatists also had a planned counter-strike to their frontal assault, using HMP gunners to sneak around and smash the artillery in. But the clones had planted rocket troopers inside the tallest buildings, blocks away from the artillery. This was a combined decision made by Ahsoka and Caleb that Bakra loved. It's why he was really coming around to the Jedi as a whole. They were actually pretty decent. He and Anakin fought side by side on the ramparts, as thousands of droids piled towards them. The clones fought valiantly. They were an unstoppable force when they strategized properly, and these Marines were the toughest Cryon Eaters in the entire Grand Army of the Republic. On the backside of the flank, Leia blocked a strike before spinning back. Luke was still not fully back into his emotional security as he charged Ventress, who encouraged him to use his rage. Luke hadn't shown any rage, but he was fighting without a sense of balance. Both Leia and Asajj felt it, but Luke's sister called out to him, telling him to focus. Asajj had Luke in a bind though. He bashed at her lightsaber and couldn't avoid the second strike. Leia used the Force to shove Luke across the ground. His boots slid as Leia leapt forward, forcing Asajj to counter and fall back into defense. Their blades smashed away at each other, and Ventress hissed. She was here to make sure these 2 Jedi didn't come out alive, but they were talented. Her weapons continued to move extraordinarily fast, but the twins got to each other's side. Leia stopped her focus on Asajj and asked Luke if he was alright. He nodded. He was just getting in his head about their whole new reality. She understood. Asajj thought they were going to attack, and so she seized the distracted minds and leapt at them. The twins smiled, turning their heads back and thrusting their hands out, launching Asajj through the air and into a pillar that broke down on top of her. She used the Force to lug the pillar piece at the twins. Leia cut it in half as Luke charged in. Their weapons collided, and the Sith assassin started to look for an escape. One of her blades was crushed by the pillar, and she was able to grab the pieces before starting a fighting retreat. On the front lines, Caleb and Ahsoka ran in with their captain to the far left flank, where they joined in on a commando strike at the middle of the droid lines. B-1s never turned back, they only kept marching, and Skywalker was trusting the Padawans with this attack. At the same time, ATTEs rode over to the ramparts and fired over the clones, decking the Separatist tanks that were coming in. Despite the darkness of the fight, the blaster bolts illuminated everything. Anakin waited for the opportune moment, and then he led the charge. with Bakra yelling in excitement and adrenaline behind his Jedi general. The battle was tense, and the clones were vastly outnumbered, but here, like across numerous battlefields, they showed the Separatists what superior training could do for them. Luke and Leia chased Ventress to the edge of the building, where she leapt backwards onto a gunship. That was her rescue. It fired rockets at the two Jedi, who used the Force to launch those rockets back into the gunship, sending Ventress away. Back in the front lines, the Separatists were led into a full-on retreat. The gunships were stopped by Ahsoka and Caleb's plan, and thanks to the intel retrieved by Leia and Luke, the future of this battle was as good as a victory. It was just a matter of time until it came. The rest of the war would carry on like this. The Sith would add another to their ranks in the form of Maul, who would be a great addition to their fight. Sidious wanted Maul back, and it was under his decision that he made a return to the Sith. The Jedi War was going as planned, and their public recognition was actually pretty popular, thanks to propaganda around Anakin, Leia, Luke, Ahsoka, and Caleb. Even without Palpatine, it was going to happen. The two Padawans were having a really solid time as Jedi. Their masters were training them adequately, which assisted them with exceeding in every possible way early on. Being around a counselor and two Jedi prodigies allowed Ahsoka and Caleb to really get the best of every single world, especially being that Luke and Leia were just representations of Shaak Ti and Plo Koon, so in turn, it helped them grow as young Jedi. They had a lot of responsibility, but no one's responsibility was as important to the Galactic Marines as Leia's investigative work. She was under the superstition that if the Separatists could build such a large military and actively producing more droids, then surely they could simply overwhelm the Republic and win. But they didn't. Luke paid a bit more attention to CIS politics than either Anakin or Leia, so he was able to support her claim by suggesting that Dooku wanted victory. While the others weren't the most in favor of it, it seemed like Dooku called all the shots as it was. So that did leave the remaining question. Why no total domination? The belief is that they were saving up for something. There was no doubt that there was something seriously wrong within the Republic. The trio agreed to that. But who and why? Power is the obvious answer to that, so naturally, Leia started to do a deep dive on Separatist factories, and then of course, where those productions went. Leia, similar to Plo Koon, had a very deep connection to the clones. Realistically, all the Jedi of the 21st Nova Corps had very strong friendships with their clone brothers, but Leia used these connections to assist her. Typically, scouts weren't supposed to break too far away from the fleet, but these scouts were simply watching factories for months. This led them to bringing information to the young Jedi Knight, and telling her that 1/4 of the forces created, whether they be droids or vessels, weren't programmed to work. They were sent in MTTs and placed inside of vessels that went to a location in the outer edge of the western mid-rim, near Endor. It was here where the 21st Nova Corps went. They came preparing for a battle with one of the larger active fleets, not in the defense zone for the Republic. But when they arrived, they didn't face battle. They found a completely turned off and neutralized fleet. It wasn't activated, and it wasn't activated because why have them ready for combat when the Republic could never learn about this military? Well, they learned. Initially, Caleb and Ahsoka thought blowing it up was a good idea, but Luke had a better one. He, like his father, had an interest in mechanics. It's something the two of them bonded over after Christophsis. But Luke suggested that they reprogram the entire reserve military. It would take time, but if they did, they could head straight for Raxis and destroy Grievous and capture the capital of the CIS, and that was a brilliant idea. Typically, Anakin commanded, but what he did, to incentivize each of his students' learning, his students being the twins or the Padawans, he made each of them take command. He would allow them the opportunity to make decisions, and he would course correct if it wasn't the right one in his opinion. Bakra initially resented this, but it grew on him. Luke's plan was a much better counter to destroying everything, and very quickly, they boarded each vessel and started their reprogramming. The best part is, after they set everything up, they were able to get the droids to help them with their work. As per their plan, the massive Separatist reserve fleet was now under Republic control and sent to Raxis, where it would pummel General Grievous's fleet, destroying him in the process. The 5 Jedi would then make their descent to Raxis with a bundle of clones. They were not the main force going to the ground. The troopers, thanks to Ahsoka and Caleb, decided to paint the Republic droids, so that no one would get confused. On the surface of Raxis, after the battle was won in space, and Republic battle droids were dropped on the ground, Dooku gathered with his 3 allies, Maul, Savage, and Asajj. Sidious had them all there because the war was in a position where he wanted it. The Jedi Council was spreading out, and he wanted to forward them in a safe location. Plus, General Grievous was going to be killed by them, and they needed reasonable leaders in the coming Empire. But this was a bit of a stall to their plan. Due to not needing to save a Jedi for a future apprentice, and having many of the additions of Savage, Maul, and Asajj, Sidious was able to lure the Jedi off of Coruscant to get them into fights with these other Sith. Because the average master was not going to beat a fully trained Savage, a recovering Maul, and a fully enveloped Sith Asajj, it required the Council to be out and about, and it was through the separation from Coruscant that Sidious could leverage political support away from the Order. Regardless, they were all blindsided by this Republic attack at Raxis, because it was not planned out with the Republic High Command. The Jedi Council knew about it, but no one else really did. Before they landed, in the gunships, Luke had a moment to rally the troops. Anakin asked someone to speak up and motivate the men, going into the mouth of the beast, and so Luke did. He told every trooper and every soldier that this was a war right here. It didn't matter how many droids the Separatists had. It didn't matter if there were 1 million or 100 million. Throughout this war, it had always been through their camaraderie that they found victory, and it would be the case here too. They each had each other's trust, they had the Force, and it would take a galaxy to stop them from going into Raxis and winning this war right here and right now. Luke finished the sentiment, reminding them that the Force would be with them. As a final word left his mouth, the doors opened, and the men jumped from the gunships and charged in. On the front lines, battle droids were fighting battle droids. This distraction gave the clones ample time to sneak in the back. The clones dispersed as Master Skywalker led the Jedi into the main chambers. Bakker was gunning for the Separatist Council and/or government. They were here to capture until the reserve battle droid forces won their fight. Those battle droids did have the support of Republic fighters, while the reserve fleet stationed itself to repel any other attacks if they came. Dooku was able to get word out to Sidious before the comms were jammed, and Sidious would react in a way to ensure his war was won by him and him alone. His allies on Raxis were just temporary fixes if they lost. Inside the main governmental chambers, Anakin ignited his lightsaber, which was followed up by 4 more. Dooku turned around. By his side was the hulking Savage Repress, and the other 2, Maul and Asajj. Dooku told the Jedi that they should not have come, and Anakin just kinda grinned. They slowly moved in, the Sith lightsabers ready themselves, and then they rushed the Jedi. Skywalker went to Dooku, Savage against Leia, Luke versus Maul, and the Padawans versus Asajj. Ahsoka was the elder of the 2, being 16, while Caleb was only 13, but they were both exceptionally talented. Anakin did not have a rivalry with Dooku. He never lost his forearm to the vile snake. Their blades still spat at each other though. Anakin, a masterful duelist, and Dooku at the end of his time. They had sparred in the past, and unluckily for Dooku, it was only Skywalker who grew in power. Anakin ducked a strike, batting the hilt of his blade into Dooku's nose, breaking it immediately, and continuing to strike at him. Leia avoided the heavy and aggressive strikes of the Zabrak beast, who even without Dathomiri magic, had plenty of time to train so he could reach such a size. Leia used her light approach to fighting to avoid him. In her natural element of Form 2, she utilized Savage's hulking strikes against him. She was quick on her feet, and even with all of his extra training, he wasn't quite as nimble as Shane. Maul and Luke were ferociously evenly matched. Luke was a fine duelist, and he utilized every aspect of the fight he could against Maul. The Sith assassin, who had returned, was quick and nimble, similar to Leia, but he and Luke traded blows like the best of them. Their duel was the most aggressive one in the room. The Padawans weren't even the combined age of Ventress, probably not even half, but she wasn't easy on them. Caleb, despite being so young, was trained by a talented room of Jedi, but it was Ahsoka who took the main brunt of the fight. She was very familiar with Ventress, having fought her once before alone, but having Caleb by her side was an additional bonus in her mind. In the middle of the room, Anakin and Dooku were locked in a fight, before Anakin shoved down, throwing Dooku from his feet. As Anakin prepared to help his friends, Dooku shot electricity at the Jedi. Anakin outstretched his one hand as he felt Savage swing at him. Anakin used the Force to hold Dooku's lightning and send it back at his face, while twisting his own blade to block Savage behind him. Dooku's head dropped back as he died from the blast, and Anakin spun around fully, slipping his defense, switching to Form 6 right in the middle of his move, and speeding around, using his lightsaber to cut Savage in half. As he landed, Leia threw her block over her father's head, defending him from Asajj, who knocked Ahsoka off balance and had thrown Caleb into the wall. Leia parried twice, before her student drove her blade into Ventress's back. Luke and Maul didn't stop their fight, but it would be Luke who found himself as champion. He had studied Obi-Wan's defeat of Maul numerous times, and it was through the exact same move that Maul was defeated. Luke leapt over Maul and parried a strike, which was the only difference between he and Obi-Wan, before driving his blade into Maul's abdomen. Sidious's plan had gone into effect, except there was a mild backfire. He used a force projection to appear as a Kaminoan, executing Orders 65, 66, and 72. Palpatine wasn't one for taking unnecessary risks, but without calling for the heads of the Senate or himself, he couldn't make it look feasible. This plan was brilliant. It would scapegoat the Kaminoans for his own goal. Not like Palpatine was at either of the main buildings when these orders were sent out. However, due to them going out at the same time, the only present division on Coruscant, the Coruscant Guard, had to divide its forces so thinly that even the largest group breaching the temple weren't able to even get through, because they were able to ready their defenses after seeing news about clone uprisings across the city and galaxy. Now, for Jedi away from Coruscant, their survival was far from guaranteed. On Raxis, the 5 Jedi would be surprised that they would handle it fine, because the only clones they interacted with were a couple guys left behind. The main group was carrying out an execution of the heads of state and the Separatist Council. Ironically, this action by Palpatine would completely upend every government in the galaxy. Because Raxis wasn't safe, the Jedi were able to take Dooku's solar sailor and abandon the planet that was under siege. The next week could only be described as the Era of Darkness. The Clone War was at an end. All the Separatist leadership was destroyed. While the droids themselves weren't out of troops, their directive was unknown. They didn't have one. They were at a choke point in the war, so it could sway either way. And with no true direction from the Confederacy, clones after finishing off Jedi outside of Coruscant were able to make their moves against unprepared droids. Those who were at the temple didn't abandon the city. They also didn't stay inside the same temple. The younglings were relocated to an old outpost on the far side of the planet, from about a century before. Knights, masters, guards, and any other volunteers went to the executive and senate buildings to save who they could. This temporary era of darkness ate the entirety of the galaxy. Skywalker's 5 Jedi would return to Coruscant to assist in the relief efforts, and Palpatine watched from the works as his failure was complete. He didn't honestly know what else to do now. It didn't make sense. Everything was perfect, aside from losing everyone on Raxis, but he was still alive. There was no reason, absolutely no reason for him to lose this, but there weren't too many Jedi casualties. Sure, the Council lost a few members, but not nearly as many as he needed. Plus, the Council had converged on Coruscant to help the relief efforts. The Jedi also did their best to avoid hurting or killing the clones, which was very challenging for them, but they did it pretty effectively. Those who survived were given refuge at the outpost until everything came to a conclusion. Because Orders 65, 66, and 72 targeted Jedi and Republic leadership, there wasn't really anything for anyone to do. Everyone was simply confused. It was an odd time for the entire galaxy. Sidious continued to try and find ways to win this, but he really couldn't. The Jedi did try to rescue the Chancellor, but he was deemed as missing, and with the galaxy going completely dark, the Neutral Systems Coalition took charge, negotiating with clones and helping make sure supply lines and trade routes didn't also go dark and slam the entire galactic economy to a halt. This saved the galaxy from more turmoil. The Jedi were still trying to find the culprit, but they had gone silent, and without any other allies, Sidious would retreat into darkness as the galaxy moved forward to create a new system and reform alliances that were destroyed by 2 people and 2 governments that no longer existed. Palpatine was becoming old and he had no students. In an effort to preserve the Sith way, he decided that he would focus on finding a new student, one traumatized by Order 66, and use such trauma to blind them into following him and the Sith. In his mind, this was pathetic. He was groveling for something, and currently there was nothing. He simply wasn't arrogant enough to take on the likes of the surviving Jedi Council, and the Jedi that killed all of his other Sith allies were still alive. It was through this that the Sith would eventually fall out of favor. Sidious was all-powerful, but as the years went by, he became hopeless. See, after the temporary era of darkness, and the Kaminoans cleared their name, kinda, By directing Order 150 to the clones and stopping the entire destruction of society, the galaxy cracked down on what started the war itself. The Federation and all of our allies were dismantled, and strict restrictions were put into place to ensure they never arose again, or anything like them came to power again. This left Palpatine with nothing, and as for the Jedi, to pull from the Order, there were none. The Jedi very quickly and dedicatedly, thanks to Master Skywalker, took care of those traumatized by Order 66. There was a much deeper connection to the light of the Force for the Jedi. Yoda stepped down from Grand Master so he could heal traumatized students. Windu therefore became Grand Master, and Skywalker became Master of the Order. This dynamic helped them pave their way into the future. This isn't to say that Sidious just vanished, but he couldn't get anything going again. This was his one shot, and he lost it. Sidious found refuge on Exegol, and it was through his time on the Hidden World that the Sith would find extinction. He had great loyalists, but at the end of the day, it didn't amount to anything for him. The Sith plan built up to a great war, and the galaxy had done everything in its power to ensure it couldn't happen again after that war failed to win for the Sith. The collective will of the people outweighed the will of one evil man. The Skywalker family would continue to find happiness inside the Jedi Order. While Luke and Leia wouldn't ever be as cavalier as their father, they would find warmth and home with their brothers and sisters in the Order. Ahsoka and Caleb eventually grew to be outstanding Jedi in the coming era. They, like their instructors, would be voices for the new era that changed the direction of the galaxy. Because both governments were completely wiped clean, and the neutral systems stood strong when the smoke lifted, the galaxy rallied around the direction of peace. Their focus was, and remained on, making a positive difference. The megacorporations didn't have influence because no one thought of bringing them back after the war revealed who they really were. The Separatist Council and corporations would vanish by the end of the decade because all their leaders were killed on Raxis. The clones would be actually treated fairly, and their inhibitor chips would be removed so they could live freely. Like the Separatist corporations, the Kaminoans would be put out of business for their unethical decision-making. Anakin would eventually become the Grand Master, following Mace Windu's natural passing. By the time he did become Grand Master, both of his children had joined the Council. The Skywalker lineage within the Jedi Order would become one of the most legendary the Order had ever seen. Each of the Skywalkers would train more, but through their Padawans, Caleb and Ahsoka, they would have their own students. Ahsoka would train Wookiee Jedi Gunji, and Caleb would train a boy from Lothal named Ezra. The Order took the initiative going into the future, and while they couldn't sit at the center of politics, especially after the war, they would be the guiding hand that led the galaxy into the light of the Force. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons: General Wells, Darth Maelstrom, Ozpin, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Gallivan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granite D. Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlinger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Anakin Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Seth Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Star Wars, Earbus, Rex the Wolf, Man with 3 First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. If you want a Star Destroyer, go down below. Giving away 3 of them. 3 lucky winners when I hit 140k. Let's hit it so we can get those Star Destroyers out to you guys and I can get ready for the next giveaway. Anyways, let's talk about this story. Having Luke and Leia during the prequel era is really unique, and I really wanted to emphasize the bond between father, daughter, and son, but I also wanted to have it in a way where they were still very loyal to the Jedi Code. But I think having this really dynamic power group during the Clone Wars would be really pretty instrumental in winning the war. I personally really love the idea of having Baccarat, the Galactic Marines, Anakin, Ahsoka, Caleb, Luke, and Leia just being a team. I think that's a power team right there. I honestly don't think anything's stopping that. Like, even if I did a dark side story on this, there's nothing stopping that. Like, Luke and Leia trained from birth, Anakin trained from birth. Obviously, he's gonna be mental in this. I just, I don't like writing him super powerful. I try and, bring it down a little bit so there's tension, but realistically speaking, no one, he could have gone in that room alone and won, but that's kind of boring. So I hope you all enjoyed the story. Giveaway down below. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.